Happy Saturday. Welcome to the Marketing Madmen. Nick Constantino here, and I'm with Holly Wasson, the Chief Marketing Officer. Dirty word, CMO. I'm sure we'll get into that. Short tenure. She's already been there for 2 years, so she's already made it past 98% of them out there. Chief Marketing Officer of Capital Investment Advisors. Holly, how you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
No, I'm happy to have you. So luckily, before this show, we had breakfast, and we covered a lot, as we probably will on this show. So I'm going to rip this script up for the first segment. Okay, so as a 10-year now Atlantan, as not a born and raised here, not been here through the business swings, the Olympics that I always hear about, I want to know about the Turner days.
Oh, wow.
I want to know, and more specifically, so I'm going to try to say this as inoffensively as I can. So there are two types of people in the marketing world that you meet as an Atlantan. You meet the Turner people and you meet the Coke people, the Coca-Cola people. I went on record and already said this. I have been relatively unimpressed by the Coke people which I have dealt with, especially of a certain generation. They seem to be very resting on their laurels, not really pushing boundaries and applying principles that were from 25 years ago. The Turner people seem like the kind of people that are going to light something on fire just to get a conversation started to rock and roll. So talk about the Turner years, talk about your experience there, and I think that will set us up for a lot of the ways that you look at marketing now.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm a native Atlantan, so it was a big dream of mine to work at Turner. And I was lucky to be there from 1997 to 2014, the end of 2014. And I grew up there. And you're right. I think the culture that we grew up in there, it was like the wild, wild west in a good way.
Yeah.
Meaning innovation was celebrated, taking risks was celebrated, but being really smart and learning from our failures. So, we saw so much during that time, from AOL buying us, Time Warner bought us, rolled AOL off. It was a very interesting time period. And then also kind of going through the transition of our brand. So we were general entertainment networks at TNT and TBS.
Right.
And
a Cartoon Network came in.
Cartoon Network,
yeah,
yes.
For sure.
So we had to understand brands. And so getting to be part of figuring out that, TNT was the drama network and that there was a certain audience that wanted dramas. And
TBS got sports for a little while.
Yes.
And then, and it has to, because you cannot cannibalize yourself. And it's one of the hardest things to understand. Like, there is some process. Starting another station, there's a natural way to cannibalize yourself, but you can't. You have to differentiate, right? That's what Procter & Gamble, they exist because they're just competing with themselves in most categories.
Absolutely.
And that's a way to win. And the consumer doesn't know that there's any. They just want this content, but you can't cannibalize it. So I think it's fascinating. I also think it's crazy. So I remember I was born in 82. In 92 or 93, I moved from Queens to the suburbs, and I got cable TV. So when I was a kid, I didn't have cable TV. So all I had was network. So I got cable TV, and I'm like, what is this? Beavis and Butthead and WWE wrestling? I'm like, I lost my mind. So the proliferation of cable was going on during that time period, right? The 90s were really when this stations were popping up and there was all this stuff and everybody was watching cable, and then cable was just without commercials and they started putting in commercials. So talk a little bit about the pace of change, because I think that's huge, and talk about what the biggest takeaways besides the people, because I know you're going to say the people, everyone says the people, and I get that part. What were your biggest takeaways from the people of seeing how quickly that was moving and what you had to do in marketing?
Well, first of all, the 90s, you're right, was amazing for cable. So at TNT, we were so focused on original movies, and we had some of the biggest name stars that were starring in these, one-off original movies. And we moved quickly. We were doing 12 to 14 of these a year. And I think we didn't have time to rest on our laurels. We didn't have a product plan 18 months to launch. We would get a script for a movie, and it was in the middle of being shot, and we had to have it on the air in 3 to 6 months. So we had to move very quickly.
Yeah, but I would imagine that was a competitive advantage against the broadcast networks, who are much more bureaucratic, longer lasting, set in their ways, not as well didn't do as well with change, which became a competitive advantage for you.
Absolutely. It was a competitive advantage. But then also, we had some brilliant leaders during this time. I'm going to name Steve Koonin, who I absolutely adore, one of my favorite people I've ever worked for, saw that we also needed more of a loyal audience. So then we morphed into having original series. But they were different on cable because we were able to get away with things that were different than the broadcast. So, we were doing 12, 13 episode series, but still building a loyal fan base.
Remind me some of those series. Because again, it's so long ago, they all blur in your head.
They do. Well, I was the brand director on The Closer with Kira Sedgwick, and it was so much fun.
The 10 p.m. shows, right? A lot of these were those hour-long, because what you had was the very stagnant, what was it, Law and Order, and they were kind of the same show and over, but you brought in an edginess to it. They became a little bit more closer to an R-rated movie, more of that stuff, right?
Absolutely. Yes, and building series that work together. So The Closer would air at 9, and then afterwards was Saving Grace with Holly Hunter that was a little bit more edgy.
Yeah.
But
these are names that are still talked about today, so there's a reason for that, right?
Absolutely.
Kira Sedgwick is in shows now today that are probably to some capacity still trying to grasp to that audience that you were creating back then.
Yes, and people loved her and loved that character. So it was, growing up in this time, and not only were we changing as what we were airing, but the mediums, how we were promoting it, were changing.
Yeah. The internet was popping right there. You needed that. You got your first glimpse. I mean, the MySpace world was probably 98, 99 where MySpace came about. Then you got a competition too because people were putting their own music and content there. Yeah, it blew up. But you're also at the same time, you're coming off of a recession, a bubble, the tech burst, the burst in 99. You're heading into turbulent wars and uncertain times also. So that's when CNN came into play. So you timed it right also. Well, it was timed right. No one could predict any of that stuff happening. Talk a little bit about that. Talk about CNN a little bit because I think, what I remember and what a lot of people talk about to this day is when it hits the fan, and I'm not going to say the word I'm going to say, when it hits the fan without two letters, people turn to CNN because they have the boots on the ground. They are the ones that are with the hats on in the line of fire. And that is what I remember during Persian Gulf War, Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Afghanistan. It was CNN when the towers hit. You turn to that for breaking news. The problem is that once people realize that, a plane hitting the Twin Towers was not breaking news anymore. Janet Jackson having her third illegitimate son somehow became breaking news, right? And she doesn't have that. I don't know why that came to my head, but you know what I mean? Everything now is breaking news. So talk about CNN a little bit.
So I started my career at CNN in the audience and marketing research department, and it was so focused on hitting and hard news. It was the very beginning of the days when Fox News had just come out, MSNBC had just come out, but I remember we didn't even see them as threats because we had such a leg up with them. We had, global coverage. We had, huge names that was covering this news. But I was there during some crazy moments, through the Monica Lewinsky trouble.
Oh, I remember that. I remember I was 13, 14 years old. I remember turning on. Crazy.
Through JFK Jr.'s plane crash.
Yeah, OJ?
Yeah. I was not there. OJ was before. I was not there for that. But unfortunately, I was there the moment we went breaking for the Columbine shooting. Yeah. So, yes.
And these we're so desensitized to them. They happen all the time. Columbine was insane.
It was shocking.
The backlash that happened. I mean, I remember personally, they were starting to blame rappers and like Eminem for these things and Marilyn Manson. Like that was the negative part now. So again, we kind of we're desensitized to a lot of this now, but CNN was the only spot where you can find a lot of this stuff because otherwise you have to wait for the 7 p.m. news on ABC and the broadcast networks.
Right. And so we were 24/7 and we had, we were able to hit reporters on the ground no matter where they were. I think what we didn't see coming. I didn't see coming. I was a journalism major, so I wanted that pure journalistic review of what was happening, was that in order to get a leg up, then you have these competitors that said, well, if CNN's going to own breaking news, let's own the commentary afterwards. And I think that's how you've got Fox News and MSNBC made their name. And over the years, it came that there would be a breaking news. People would turn to CNN to see what happened. And then they would turn to one of the others to figure out, what should I think about this?
Yeah, and I think that because what happens with the 24-hour news cycle is then cell phones started coming, so then you're getting alerts on your phone, so you don't even have to be watching, it just comes to you, and then after that, what you want is the commentary. Because one thing we have bred, and we talked about this, unfortunately, we talk about flaws of the education system, we breed sheep. We breed people that don't want to think for themselves and be self-starters. And I get it. It's part of the mechanism that makes money in capitalism. So you want to turn it. The problem is that when you start regurgitating information that is falsely sourced and built for propaganda is the word, for money and for views, then it's a telephone. It always gets a little bit more distorted, and it comes out the other end a completely different story than it started with. So it's a shame to see it. But so obviously, so you saw the journalism side. So talk about some of the similarities between journalism and marketing.
So I wanted to be a journalist. That was my goal in life. I studied journalism. I wanted to either be Katie Couric or Oprah.
Ooh, you shot high.
I shot really high.
That's good.
But then when I got my foot in the door in the audience and marketing research department, I realized as marketers, we're telling stories, but we're just telling it on a larger scale. And oftentimes, especially in that day and age, in shorter segments.
Yep.
So I realized what I enjoyed so much about journalism is understanding the audience and understanding what's going to capture their attention and what they need. And then that has worked to help me with my marketing career, because to me, I will always preach as, your traditional marketing person, know your audience, know your audience, know your audience. It doesn't care. I don't care what the shiny new thing is. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. And I think one of the problems is for me, I agree with you, but I tell people two things. Know who you want your audience to be, and know who your audience really is. Because we are so, especially as a business owner, you're so jaded and biased by your own beliefs that sometimes you believe something not to be true. So I think you should have the aspirational audience of who you want it to be, but I think you should also know your real audience. So we got about a minute left in this segment. So talk briefly what research looked like and data looked like, because it's probably changed a little bit.
Yes, it has changed a little bit. So I worked in that research group. We did a lot of focus groups. So especially with at TNT and TBS, every time we had a movie coming out, we would do quantitative research studies, but then we would take that information and go hold focus groups and show them our series or our movies and or our artwork, and we would do them in person.
Yeah.
So that's what it looked like then, and then it gradually evolved into having online communities that we could test things in front of, and panels, if you will. But it was very much in person, and
And I love it, right? Because I always say it's the art of science and magic, but here it's the same thing, quantitative and qualitative. Each one has its own merits. Each one has its own flaws. When you combine the two together, because you cannot ever match the sample size of the qualitative with the quantitative with the qualitative, so you were reliant more on going deeper and everything. The problem is that when you start incentivizing people, their incentives change no matter what, because the reason they're doing it is different. So if you're paying somebody that wants to come back for a survey, your likelihood is to say either really good or really bad, because nobody cares about the middle. So we'll leave that as the cliffhanger. You've been listening to The Marketing Madman on Extra 106.3. We'll be right back.